In the series which we are doing on the making of contemporary India from 1950 to 1990s, today we'll talk about the other political formations. In one of the last lectures, we talked about the Indian National Congress and the contribution of the Congress in the national movement, and thereafter how Congress grew as a political party after independence. And in relation to that, we will also today talk about the other political formations apart from the Congress, as we have already discussed it. And these political formations or these political parties which were there after independence, how they played an important role in making the democracy vibrant in nature through their timely opposition and constructive opposition. They were able to play an important role in the sense that various issues which they were raised, they were being taken up by the government at different levels, and government played also listened to kind of the rhetoric which was going on at that point of time. And in that context, I would like to convey the kind of references or the bibliography which is Bipin Chandra, India after Independence, Ramchandra Guha's India after Gandhi, Myron Wiener, Party Politics in India. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the kind of developments in India in the context of the various political parties which emerged after independence. And some of them, they were already functioning before the Indian independence, and we see that how the national movement played an important role in terms of the various political parties, and how the leaders of the various political parties they were inspired by they had these kind of aspirations and the ideals with regard to the kind of India which they wanted to see after independence. So we find that how the political parties, many of them, they were largely all India in character, and if you see the organization or the program or the structure of these parties, then they were not in a way catering to only certain sections, and even if they were political bases, they were limited to specific areas or classes or sections of society. Even then their policies were such that they were all India in character. And we also find that how, because of these national objectives and how they took up the all India issues, and this is how they sustained an all India leadership, and the kind of programs which were followed by them, they were concerned with the social, economic and political development of the country as a whole. So we find that the contribution of these political parties was immense after independence of India, and the way the constitution, the Constituent Assembly played an important role in making the constitution, and how constitution it provided the way these political parties, how the constitution provided some kind of a guidelines to them that how these political parties they have to function in the society. So we find that if you try to understand the political parties of those times, then we will find that many of these political parties they were comparatively weaker when you compare them with the Congress. But at the same time, the kind of demands which they raised, at the same time we have to see the way they positioned themselves, then we will not find that they were weaker, because they were talking about certain issues which were very relevant in those times. And because of their understanding of the socio-economic and political situation of the country, where they were in a way campaigning for the alternative sets, they were able to put a lot of pressure on the government, and they also criticized the government, and in a way played a constructive role where the government can take such steps which are for the betterment of the society and the country. So in that sense, they were wielding a lot of influence in that sense, that how they were also able to influence the public opinion. And one of the things which we find during this time, that how many of these parties they were weak because they were not able to unite, and we also find that they had more in common with one or the other wings of the Congress than with each other, because we find that how during the national movement, Congress and other political parties, they were working in tandem to throw the British yoke, and how they in a way shared certain ideas or philosophy which was in tandem with the Congress. And we find that how these political parties, when they united in the later times, especially in 1977 and in 1989, when we find that they were able to defeat the Congress, and because of their coming together in both these places in 1977 as Janata Party and later as a front in 1989, we find that how at both the occasions they were able to vote out the Congress in terms of the power which was being wielded by the Congress. And when we tend to understand the various political parties of those times, then we find that these political parties, one of which was the Socialist Party, and it held the greatest promise, and some of the leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan, he had mass popularity. On the screen you can see the image of Acharya Narendra Dev. But we find that other leaders which were important, they were also Ashok Mehta, Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, S.M. Joshi, Achyut Patwardhan. So these were some of the important leaders of the Socialist Party, and how the people, those who were associated with the Socialist Party, the kind of relation which they had with the Congress, as Socialist Party was born in 1934, and it was the part of the Congress as Congress Socialist Party, and in a way they rejected the Mountbatten plan for the independence and the partition of the country. They were not in consonance with Congress with regard to the Mountbatten plan with concerning the partition and the division of the country. So we find that in a way the motto of the people, those who were associated with the Socialist Party, was to develop India into a socialist state and society, and they wanted that the Congress should make a definite program and ideological commitment to socialism, that unless Congress will have any kind of a definite plan, then it will not be able to take decisions concerning socialism. And we find that how a resolution which was moved by Patel in 1948, and because of which a rule was framed in the Congress that how one who was a member of Congress cannot be the member of another political party which had its own constitution and discipline, and because of which we find that many socialists, they left the Congress, and they in a way suggested that their main aspiration was to establish the democratic socialist society. So we find that how these socialists, those who were associated with the Congress at that point of time, and when they left the Congress because of this rule, not only weakened them, but at the same time the idea of socialism which was there in the members of some of the members of the Congress, it also got a jolt, because these people, they came out of the Congress. As you can see on the screen, that with regard to the socialists, they had assumed that with the achievement of independence, there no longer existed any common task to unite them with non-socialists in Congress, but material, social and political foundations of socialist India still needed to be laid through economic development with equity, secular democracy and consolidation of national unity, and Congress was still the main organization that could fulfill this task. So socialists, they were assuming certain things, and in a way their assumptions were not always correct that way, and they at one point of time felt that they did not have any common task to unite them with the non-socialist in the Congress, which was some kind of a wrong assumption. And if you see the kind of society, if you see the kind of economy, the polity of India at that point of time, then they had to in a way realize that how when they were with Congress they could have played an important role in terms of supporting the Congress. And when you tend to understand the kind of problems or the kind of limitations which were there, then the political skill and the leadership which was there to function in a party that was practically a front, it lay precisely in competing with the other trends in it without breaking party discipline, so as to build a broad coalition for nation building and social change and ultimately socialism. So we find that these were certain things which were to be taken care of at that point of time, and how socialists, they were a minority in the Congress, and how they were facing resistance and organizational discrimination at the party's local level. So what the political wisdom demanded at that point of time, and also the art of politics, that how this situation was to be accepted, and then some kind of a struggle was to be continued to gradually change the balance of power. So we find this is what the socialists were not ready to do as they left the Congress. And even if we tend to see that how the socialists, neither the socialists nor the communists, or if they were taken, two of them, they were taken together, then it was not an impossibility at that point of time, and how they were capable of replacing the Congress or bringing about socialism and social change on their own in opposition to the Congress. So we find that the socialists and the communists, even if they would have come together, so even then it was not possible at that point of time, and they were not capable of replacing the Congress or bringing about any kind of a change in the context of socialism or the social change when they were in opposition to the Congress. And this we find that how when these socialists, they departed from the Congress, they were in a way got weakened, and they did some kind of a harm to the left trend in the Indian politics, and it also led to the destruction over a period of time, destruction of the Socialist Party in terms of the various splits which took place. And we find that the general elections of 1951-52, it was a disaster for the party, and they realized that how their situation without the Congress at that point of time was. Then we see the emergence of the Kisan Mazdoor Praja Party, KMPP, and how the Congress dissidents, they were led by J.B. Kripalani, and in June 1951 they formed this party, and they were claiming to be Gandhian and being in basic agreement with the Congress program and policies, and the new party promised to implement that program. And KMPP also entered general elections with high hopes and was even more disappointed with the results than the Socialist Party. So we find that the other political formation, the KMPP, which we talked about, and how it was formed in 1951 when J.B. Kripalani left the Congress, and how this political party also entered the election fray with very high hopes, and the way they got disappointed in terms of the kind of seats which they received, as they were not able to calculate their electoral strength. And we find that how these two parties, they felt that there were no ideological or programmatic differences between them. And J.B. Kripalani, he also talked about that his wishes in terms of that how a classless and a casteless society which was free from the social, political and economic exploitation was the thing which both these wanted as well. And the socialists, they called it as the socialist society, and they called it as Sarvodaya society. So the realization by the various political groups which were initiated or which were active in the political sphere, which contested elections, and then they realized their electoral strength, that it was not up to the mark, and so they wanted to create that kind of a society, as Kripalani talked about, a classless and a casteless society. And that is how we find that all these parties with similar kind of an ideology, especially these two parties, they emerged in September 1952 to form the Praja Socialist Party, where Kripalani was made the chairman, Ashok Mehta as the general secretary, and it became the largest among the opposition parties, and it in a way was to be some sort of an alternative to the Congress. And if we see the organization, then it was covering the entire country, and leaders at both levels, at the national as well as the state levels, they were there. But we find that it was not able to maintain its cohesion for a long period of time. And we find that how the ideological and the factional quarrels, they were there, and splits could also be seen during this time. And the way the leaders they were there, they were indisciplined, many of them, and the cadres, they also behaved in the similar manner. And there were a lot of differences in terms of the distinct role in the Indian politics as an opposition party. They were not very clear that the kind of role which they had to play as an opposition party. And we find that from 1953 to 64 the party was in a way in a situation that how many of the issues they tore the party, and they were not very clear the kind of attitude which they should have in terms of the Congress, and also with regard to the militant and the extra constitutional agitations, and also in terms of the kind of role which they should play in the nation building activities. And we find that some of the members like Ashok Mehta in June 1953 at party's Betal conference, he offered his thesis that in a backward country, important task was that of economic development, and in a constructive spirit, opposition should cooperate with the ruling party in that task. So some of the members of this party, for example Ashok Mehta, he also in a way went his ideas or provided his ideas, and he felt that the Congress and the Praja Socialist Party, they had a common belief in nationalism, socialism, democracy, and the Praja Socialist Party should look for areas of agreement with the Congress, and it should only oppose the Congress when the matters of the principles they were being involved. And the thesis which was proposed by Mehta was rejected in the favor of the thesis or the approach which was given by Ram Manohar Lohia, who was not in this favor. And party was could not be seen in agreement with the ideas which were given by Ashok Mehta. And thereafter we see that how Ashok Mehta was made the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, and he also broke away from the Praja Socialist Party, and the supporters they also went out of this party. So these kinds of splits over time and again could be seen during this particular period, and we find that these political parties how when they not only in terms of the personality cult or the personality conflict which they had, but many a times in the context of the ideological positions as well. And thinkers like Lohia, they did not want that how Congress and the Communist, both of them, they should be kept at equidistance, and he also talked in the framework of the organization of the militant mass opposition movement. And he felt that even if they were not within the legal, legislative and constitutional framework, even then such kind of movements they should be advocated and supported. And so the thinkers or the people, those who were associated, or the leaders, those who were associated with the Praja Socialist Party, for example Lohia, they had their way. And we also find during this time that how the various members, those who left the party at different points of time, they also made the party weak. And leaders like Lohia and his group, they also left the PSP at the end of 1955. And then Acharya Narendra Dev died in 1956, and Jayaprakash Narayan, he withdrew from the active politics in 1954, and announced that he would dedicate his life to Bhudan and other constructive activities. So we find that the flurry of leaders, those who were associated with the group, they left the party with their followers, or they were not in a position where they could serve the party, which in a way gave some kind of a fatal blow to the party. And some of the thinkers, those who were associated with the party, they were talking in the framework of the partyless democracy, as Jayaprakash Narayan talked about. And we find that in 1960 even Kripalani left the party, and when later we find that Ashok Mehta became the deputy chairman of the planning commission, and then he was expelled from the party, and then he joined the Congress in 1964. And there were others also, those who left this party. Then we find that socialists, they were not able to distinguish themselves from the Congress, and how their inability to distinguish themselves from the Congress proved to be a factor in terms of their decline, that how they could play an important role when they were within the Congress. And how the splits of the various leaders, that how they left the party at different points of time, it also played an important role in terms of the decline of these parties. And we find that how two issues which were in a way emphasized by Lohia, that he talked about the immediate abolition of the English and its replacement by Hindi as sole link language, and secondly was the reservation of over 60% of jobs for backward caste, scheduled tribes and women. And he accused the government of being dominated and serving the cause of the upper caste. So we find that thinkers like Lohia, those who were thinking in that sense, that how English was to be abolished and how Hindi was to be served as a link language, and how these kinds of jobs etc. they were to be reserved. And he criticized Congress for being dominated by the upper caste, and it was serving the cause of the upper caste as well. And we find in 1967 Lohia and his followers were able to seek cooperation with Swatantra Party and Janasangh on the one hand and Communists on the other, in order to defeat the Congress. So they clearly articulated and initiated politics of anti-Congressism at that point of time. And Socialist Party was also not free from the dissidents, defections and the splits, and especially after death of Dr. Lohia in 1967. So we find that in terms of summarizing what we have done, that how the various parties like Socialist and the Kisan Mazdoor Party, Praja Party, how they tried to play an important role in the Indian politics, and how they were being viewed in the context of the kind of policies which were being framed by the Congress, and how many of them they were part of the Congress in the earlier times during the national movement. In the next lecture we will talk about the other political formations in the Indian context, when we will talk about the other political parties of that time. Till then, thank you very much.